Welcome to the Open Forum. Once again, we have the wonderful opportunity to open our Bibles and to talk together about this verse and this doctrine and that doctrine, trying to make sure that we have the truth. And because, we're living in a day when all kinds of ideas are being expressed, doctrines are being offered. Most of them are those that have been developed throughout the church age, but even some that are developed very lately, many of them are not true at all, and therefore we have to make sure that we are checking out verse after verse to make sure we have the truth. Because my, how awful it is if we say, "Thus saith the Lord," and yet the Lord does not say it. We should be praying constantly, "Oh Lord, help us to make sure that we are teaching, we are declaring thy word accurately, and not because we are not because we are careless in the way we are bringing truth from the Bible." But this is your program. We want to hear from you, and so shall we take our first call tonight, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, Mr. Camping, I was going door to door asking people about, the Lord and talking about salvation, and I met this Muslim fella in Muslim garb, and he told me that Jesus did not die, but he was actually replaced on the cross by his lookalike, Judas Iscariot. Now, what would you say if a man said that Jesus was replaced by Judas Iscariot?
Well, the fact is that there are all kinds of crazy ideas. We know, of course, that Judas Iscariot was the Satan infilled him and came to bring him to the Pharisees so that he could become a captive, so that he would be brought to trial and eventually be killed. And then Judas was simply, he committed suicide. He hanged himself and followed his hanging, and so that his bowels gushed forth. And so this idea that he has something to do with replacing Satan, that is silly. And, if you're going to go from place to place, you can talk about all kinds of crazy things, but we have to make sure that if we're going to bring truth, we're bringing the truth of the Bible.
Yeah, because it says, "I speak not of you all. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he that eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it come, that when it is come to pass, you may believe that I am he." And, so he was pointing the people to the very prophecy that Judas had to fulfill. Judas had to betray Christ because, 1,000 years before, David had written that prophecy about his part to play in prophecy. So, to say that he was, not killed and that Judas replaced him is absurd. And how about the 72 blushing virgins? Now, is there sex in heaven, or what does the Bible say? Do we get, if we kill people, do we get 72 blushing virgins, or is that a sin to kill people?
There is nothing in the Bible that talks about 72 blessed virgins at all. They're just not found anywhere in the Bible. And so if it isn't found in the Bible, then we know that it's something that people talk about, but they're doing it without any relationship to the Word of God. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes.
Yes.
Brother Camping?
Yes, welcome.
Yes. Daniel 11, verses 5 and 6.
Let's look at that. Daniel 11. Daniel 11, verse 5 and 6. We have to go to Daniel 11. There we read in Daniel 11, verse 5, and the king of the south shall be strong, and of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, and in the end of the years they shall join themselves together. The king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arms, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and they that begat her, and he that strengthened her in those times. Incidentally, these are words that I have not really worked on very carefully myself, and therefore I don't feel qualified at all to try to answer what these verses are really talking about.
Well, can you just basically tell me spiritually who the king of the south or the north represents?
Well, normally the king of the south represents those who are true believers, whereas the king of the north normally we can think of representing those who come against the truth. But whether that is always true, I cannot tell. I would rather not try to answer that question.
Okay.
I'll be speculating.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, Mr. Campbell. I have two Bible questions I need to ask. Can we go to Isaiah chapter 34?
Isaiah chapter
verse 15. Verse 15 to verse 16.
All right, Isaiah 34, verse 15 and 16.
And then I have another one I wanted to go to after that.
There we read Isaiah, no, not Isaiah 34 verse. Oh, yes, here it is.
Yes.
There shall the great, I'm going to have to put some glasses on. I'm not doing very well tonight. Verse 15, there shall the great make her nest, there shall the great owl make her nest, and lay and hatch and gather until under the shadow. These shall the vultures also be gathering, everyone with her mate, and they shall seek out of the book of the Lord of Jehovah and read, and not one of these shall fail. None shall want her image, her mate, for my mouth it hath commanded, and his spirit it hath gathered them. There was a time when I worked so much on these verses, and I put a lot of little suggestions in the borders and between the words, and I did it so badly that I almost cannot read the words. But these are very, very difficult passages.
I know. But what my question is to that passage is, concerning in this day and time, looking for a mate, like my soulmate, and I was wondering, is it possible that that can be possible find in this and when we only have like a year and 6 months to go, to find that special one and get married and have a family, because I'm 38 years old and I haven't happened yet for me, but I'm still believing and praying and hoping that will happen for me.
In other words, you're still working whether you would like to become married?
No, I still desire for that to happen. I wanted to meet the soulmate, or the one that's for me to have, children.
Well, Isaiah 34 has nothing at all to do with that at all. But the fact, the language is so difficult that really has the mate is a phrase that is meaning something altogether different. It is not talking about marriage at all. But let's get back to your question. We have a year and a half. Now, before we get married to anybody, we want to make sure that they are people that love the Lord. If we love the Lord, we do not want to be unequally yoked to an unbeliever. And so you just can't go out and find somebody and marry them. You have to find somebody who really you believe that they love the Lord, if you do. And secondly, you have to find someone that not only loves as you do, but that they love you. And just because you have an intense desire to marry someone, that doesn't mean the individual that you think you might like to marry wants to marry you. And so all of that takes time, takes a lot of time. And if that is important to you, why would that be important when you realize that in 18 months and a week or two, we come to that time when it's the end, and we better start thinking very seriously about my relationship with Christ, very, very seriously, and you're going to be looking for a mate. You're going to be looking for someone who is thinking the same way, and so that's all I can say at this point. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, I have a question regarding, I wanted to know if a physical building or a location, place that you are, can determine whether or not you're truly worshiping God, whether you're truly serving or worshiping God. Does it depend on where you're at?
I'm sorry. You're asking about a physical building.
Yeah.
What kind of a physical building?
Can a building or a location determine whether or not you are truly worshiping God?
By that building?
If you're in a building
excuse me. Worshiping God is a very spiritual, personal matter between an individual and God. It doesn't have anything to do with a physical building, unless you're using that physical building for your own interests and you don't care anything about God, then that's another thing. But worshiping has nothing to do with a physical building.
Okay. So, for example, if you're standing in the middle of a pew at a church and you're truly worshiping God, then it doesn't matter if you're in that church or you're outside of that church or in the parking lot or in the middle of the street. You're still truly worshiping God.
Well,
correct?
Excuse me. The churches today are under the authority of Satan. And if you are a member of that church, you are worshiping Satan, who comes as an angel of light. And that church has nothing to do with the building. It has to do with those who are members of that congregation and who have been following the rules that God has laid down. what the church is. You can be the Church of Christ by serving together by the riverside. You don't need a physical building. But ever since 1988, when we come to the end of the church age, Satan rules there, and so we don't want anything at all to do with that. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yeah, Mr. Camping, it's becoming increasingly evident, even by your own admission, that there are many important verses in Scripture that you haven't worked on, can't comment on because you've not given much attention to, due diligence to. How is it that we can be so certain we have a year and a half left when there are so many verses that could contain information you haven't even worked on and provide additional thoughts to this concept?
Excuse me. There are many verses that have nothing to do with the timeline of history or the character of God's judgment plan. There are many, many verses. And therefore, because the all-important thing that we have been interested in is the timeline of history, those kind of verses have been examined and cross-examined and checked out again and again and again. But when we read a verse that very obviously has nothing to do with the timeline, sometimes we can understand them and sometimes we cannot understand them. And so just because we aren't able to carefully understand everything that is in the Bible, that doesn't mean that we have not understood God's timetable. As a matter of fact, you know, the two proofs, all the proofs that God has given us that May 21, 2011 is the day of judgment, and that it's exactly 7,000 years after the year that the flood did occur. Those kind of proofs are very profound, and they guarantee that all the work that has been done concerning the timeline of history has been done accurately. But that doesn't mean that, for example, let me give you an illustration. If we look for example, the ceremonial laws of burnt offerings or blood sacrifices, and there are various kinds of offerings that were to be offered, and I don't think anybody has ever been able to go through those various sacrifices and understand exactly why this one is a little different from that one. But we do know that they are all pointing to Christ being a sacrifice for our sins. And so the fact that we don't know every verse is not raising any questions about the validating that the timeline of history has been accurately worked out.
If you don't know if you don't understand all the verses, how do you know that they do not pertain to it? I mean, you've not studied them. There's no way you can know that they don't pertain.
How do you know? Well,
if you've not studied them, how can you say so certainly that they don't?
Well, excuse me. Every verse at one time or another has been looked at, and to find those verses that might in any way relate to the timeline of history. And there are many statements that it's very obvious that they have nothing to do with the timeline of history, and we just don't have time to, it takes an enormous amount of time to relate whatever we do learn, and there are things that we don't have time, have not had time to look at. But that does not impact in any way that we do not have not done very, very accurate work with all the passages that have to do with the timeline of history. Now, you are simply speaking because you have not read the Bible. You have not read the Bible that carefully at all. Maybe you've read it once or twice, but you can make kind of charges of that kind, but they don't make sense at all.
Right,
but thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, good evening.
Yes.
Last night you had a caller who made a reference to a verse, if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, thou shalt be saved. And you had answered him and referred to a verse, I believe, in Joel, where it says, how deceitful is the heart, who can know it?
Well, you know...
And said that the heart is not in a condition to be able to do that.
Well, as a matter of fact, you put your finger on a very, very important piece of information. If we go back to the book of Joel, let's look at that a moment. Back in the book of Joel, we read in verse chapter 2, we read there, verse 12, therefore also now saith Jehovah, turn ye even to me with all your heart, and with fasting, and with weeping, and with mourning, and rend your heart, and not your garments, and turn unto Jehovah your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and repenteth him of the evil. Who knoweth if he will return and repent, and leave a blessing behind him, even a meat offering and a blood offering unto Jehovah your God. Now, the fact is, God is, we talk again and again in this day that because we are not sure of our salvation, we should be crying to God for mercy. We should come to him with a broken and a contrite heart, like Israel, like the Ninevites did in the book of Jonah. They cried out with all their heart, and the fact is that they became saved. And so how can that match with the fact that God has a program where he has elected those that he planned to save? What's the point of crying with all our heart, or of crying to God? But this is this is where everything begins to coalesce and tie together. Here is a person, and God has not told that person at all whether they are elect of God, whether they are one of those that God has paid for their sins, and that in time they will become saved. They don't know that. Nobody knows that ahead of time. And yet he tries to cry to God. He looks at the people in the days of Nineveh, when those people cried out, oh God, have mercy, have mercy. Is it possible that you might save us? And the fact is, he's crying out as best he knows how. He's crying out. But can he cry out like someone who has been saved? You see, the fact is that God first has to save us before we will be crying out to God in a way so that it is so pleasing to God that indeed it will assure our salvation. We can cry out and cry out and cry out, and as near as we can tell, we're broken before God, and yet we are not broken at all before God. We think we are. We're doing our best to try to talk to God that we are broken and that we please have mercy, have mercy, have mercy. But until God gives us a new heart, that is, until he saves us, we will not be crying out to God in a way that is finally pleasing to God. We may think we're trying our best, but we cannot do it in a way that is pleasing to God unless God has saved us. And it's because only the salvation comes first. And now we don't have any problem left. We as people cry out to God for God's mercy, if it turns out that they were one of God's elect, then as they're crying out, they will be doing so that in a way that is pleasing to God, because they were saved before they began to cry out to God. Whereas if they were not one of God's elect and they're crying out to God, and crying out to God and crying out to God, and really are as broken as they know how to be before God, yet it will not be pleasing to God like it is for those who have become saved before they were crying out. And so we don't really have any contradiction of any kind. The problem is we don't know what it really means to cry out to God in a way that is pleasing to God unless we indeed had been elected of God before God ever planned the salvation of this world.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hi, Brother Camping. How are you tonight?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, good. Can we please look at Luke 23, verse 34?
Luke 23, verse 31. Let's look at that.
No, 34.
Luke 23, verse 34.
Mm-hmm.
Luke 23, verse 34. We read, "Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots," and so on. Now, hold on, and we'll be right back with you right after this question. We're looking at Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Jesus hanging on the cross. He has been cruelly nailed there to the cross. He has been condemned by liars who were bringing statements that were not true at all. And then Jesus, while he's hanging on the cross, made this very interesting statement. "Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots." Now, who are they whom Christ is giving at that moment? Is he forgiving the soldiers who nailed them to the cross? Is he forgiving the Pharisees who brought him before Pilate, bound him and brought him before Pilate? Is he forgiving Judas who betrayed him? Who is he forgiving? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. The fact is that Christ is demonstrating how he made payment for the sins of all of those that he had planned to save. Now, whom God has planned to save, who has elected to salvation, we have we don't know that it required that he had to be brought to trial and be found guilty and be killed and so on. We did not know all of that, but it's on our behalf. It's because of God's plan to bring us into the new heaven and the new earth that he had to do this. And therefore, because of the fact that he had to do this on our behalf, that is why he could say, forgive them. They know not what they do. We didn't realize what we were doing, but that is the fact, that we actually had to demand, the Bible doesn't put it quite that way, but actually, if Christ had not made payment as he did, we never would have been saved.
Okay, I have another question, Mr. Camping.
Yes.
Being that I'm a woman, am I allowed to share what I'm learning in the Bible with others?
Well, now you have to be very careful. The fact is that if you are teaching your children, for example, you can teach your children. If you are with women, you can teach women. But we must be careful that we do not try to become a teacher of the Bible just to anybody. That would be a contradiction. The fact is, Christ says that a woman is not to teach or have authority over men. The big role of the woman is the bearing of children and working with the family. That is the big role. And it is God's plan that it is the men that are to deal with the matter of doctrines and so on and teach for those whom God would have that taught. You know, it's the women who got Solomon into enormous trouble. Mm-hmm. It was the women who it was a woman that got Adam in enormous trouble. And God makes reference to that in 2 Timothy chapter 2, that Eve caused Adam to sin. But on the other hand, he honors women in a very special way because they're able to bear children. No man can bear a child, but it is God who used a woman to give Christ a human nature, which was a glorious honor for women. And so while women, they can really think that they're trying to be a theologian or they really have learned a lot from the Bible, but they better be very quiet about it because they're going to run into trouble with God.
Okay. And just one more quick thing. Could you just point out to me in the Bible where homosexuality is an abomination to God?
Well, if they ask you, yes, by all means, we can show them from the Bible that it is an abomination. But again, you don't have to be out there trumpeting this. Because then you are trying to teach men. If they ask you, what do you think about this? Of course you're going to say what you know to be true. But you're not going to make that your vendetta in the world. Then again, you're in violation of the Bible.
Alrighty.
And you know, we have to be so careful to keep our place. In our day especially, it is difficult for the woman because of women's rights. And you know, the woman in the marketplace is trying to be everything that the man is, and being a mother is less and less important, and the whole business is upside down, and it is all part of the fact that we're ready now for Judgment Day.
Okay.
But thank you for calling and sharing, and shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Mr. Camping?
Yes.
Your fifth caller a while ago was asking you important questions. You cut him off. I tend to wonder the same thing too. Certain times people calling and ask you a question, you can answer it, and certain time you can't.
I'm sorry. I don't remember that I cut anybody off. I certainly did not do it on purpose.
The fifth gentleman that called to find out how come there are certain things you can answer and certain. He wasn't finished and you cut him off. So, you know, is this Mr. Camping Forum or the People's Forum? I'm confused.
Well, the fact is that this is a program that is designed to bring truth, And and I happen to be named to be the host of this program. I have to carry out this program, and so if we're going to keep a fair program going, we have to stay with those things that we can talk about intelligently. And if someone is going to call up and want to talk about a verse that I have no understanding of or not enough, I do not have enough understanding to talk intelligently about it, then we cannot carry it on this program, because that is just not the nature of the program. However, we find that we are able to cover enormous amounts of truth from the Bible on this program. And so we can always object to something that we don't like about this program, and that's understandable, because nobody can be right about everything. That is, do it the best way, but we do try our best to be fair to everybody. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello, Mr. Camping.
Yes.
How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
I'm just confused about one little thing. You keep referring to the little book that has been opened, and I believe the little book that you're talking about is in Revelation chapter 5, the book with the 7 seals, because the little book referred to in Revelation chapter 10 is spoken of as already being opened at that time.
Yes, it is the book that was written by Daniel, given to Daniel to write, and it is called the book, but it's also called a little book.
Is it called the little book?
Yes.
Where is that book called a little book? Because in Revelation it talks about a little book in chapter 10.
Yes, that is it. That's the same. Yes, let's look at that now. Revelation chapter 10. Let's look at Revelation chapter 10. We read there in verse...
Because it says the book is already opened it does say that the 7 thunders spoke, and that what was said by the thunders was not recorded in the book. But John says, I saw a little book that was opened. It's basically saying that it was already opened at that time.
And the voice, we read in verse 8, and the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, Go, and take the little book which standeth, take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it, and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, and it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand, and ate it up, and it was so in my mouth sweet as honey, and as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, Thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Now, it's simply talking about a little book, and there's no evidence at all that it's any book except that which just has been opened, beginning in Revelation 5 and finishing in Revelation 8, verse 1, when the 7th seal is taken off. But now it is a book that we are to read very, very carefully, and it's called the little book because obviously it is not the whole Bible all over again. It is that part of the Bible that God has sealed at the time that Daniel had been given that.
So the book in Revelation chapter 10 and the book with the 7 seals in Revelation chapter 5 would be referring to the same book.
Well, but it's not talking about in Revelation 10 about 7 seals, I don't believe. It is simply saying that there is a little book, and he has already discussed that in some length, beginning in Daniel 12, and then carrying over to Revelation 5, and 6 and 7 and the first verse of chapter 8. And then he picks up again in Revelation 10, calling it a little book, because after all, there's not one word added in when that book is open. It's we haven't, our Bible has not grown in size by even one word. It is simply that God is giving us more understanding of what has been in the Bible all the time. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in Matthew 24. I think it says, I don't know the exact verse, iniquity will abound and the love of many will wax cold.
In Matthew 24, iniquity shall abound, and the love of man shall grow cold.
And the love of many will wax cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved.
Yes. What is your question?
If you look at that, in the last 60 years, things got real bad. I think that verse alone tells you that Jesus is coming back very soon. Oh, we can't go by that?
Well, the fact is that we're living in that day, that iniquity does abound. It's sin. Iniquity is sin, and sin is growing by leaps and bounds like it never has been. And those who claim that they are loving the Lord, they are more and more independent from the Bible. Whatever love they have, it has been waxing colder and colder. And it's right now at the end of time when this is happening.
Yes, and it seems like that one church is even noticing that. They don't even notice he's coming back soon, let alone the exact date.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. Would you read?
Not one person in one church is even saying he's coming back soon. Do you understand me?
Well, no one says that he's returning soon. The fact is that people are not reading the whole Bible. They are reading their doctrines that they have learned, that their church follows, and they are not listening to the whole Bible. The people in the churches today are not aware of all that we are teaching on Family Radio about the fact that we're right at the end, and yet all that we teach comes right from the Bible, and if you don't listen to the Bible, well then of course you're not going to teach it. You're going to be ignorant of it, and that's unfortunately the situation in the churches. But thank you, and shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yeah, Mr. Campion, we got cut off. I was asking about marriage, and I had a second question I wanted to ask. And the question concerning marriage, I was wondering, is it important as far as marriage is concerned, meeting someone who believes the same as I do in regards to May 21st, 2011?
Well, what is your question?
Well, I was concerning marriage, and on the second one is...
Excuse me, we talked about that, and there's no reason in the world someone should not get married. You can get married. The Bible doesn't say we stop getting married just because we're right near the end, but the Bible does tell us what is necessary for a right marriage. You can't marry a divorced person. You have to marry someone who is you're not going to be unequally yoked with, and these are very, very difficult things to carry out in this day, and they do take time. But the warning would be that, fine, you really are beset with the idea, I want to get married, that's all I can think about. Well, fine. What about the fact that in a year and a half the end is here? How much time are you spending thinking about that? Because you can get married before the end, and if you're not a child of God, you're going to go right into the day of judgment. So you've got some very, very big things to think about in addition to marriage. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. I had a couple questions, actually. One of them is that in the Bible it speaks about the sons should not pay for the sins of the fathers, or the fathers not the sins of their children. But in the
that the son does not pay.
I think it is.
Yes, that's in
Acre or something stole this old Babylonian garment.
Yeah.
And all his family was taken. Burned.
That is found in a couple of places in the Bible. I'm not sure that I can. No, I can't find them offhand. One passage is in Ezekiel, I believe, but and the other is in another passage someplace. But it is a fact that each individual pays for his own sins, and we don't pay for anybody else's sin.
Well, why did God order them to be stoned and burned, and like in the book of Joshua, where that Babylonian garment was stolen, and they found it in the tent of this person?
Why were the sons of Achan, for example? Well, it was because we don't know all the information. Achan stole that golden wedge, and he buried him in his tent, and because his whole family was destroyed, the likelihood is that his whole family was in on the action, and they probably would be because it's in the tent that he dwelt in, and they dwelt in the same tent. And so, but God doesn't give us all the information, but we do know that God's judgment is upon the sin of the individual, so we have to assume that they were included in the sin.
So what about when we swear to God, or like, for example, a friend of mine, he's very uncomfortable about putting his hand on the Bible and saying, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help me God. Is there, because our law requires it.
Well, excuse me. Here's your question. Why are we called upon, for example, when we're before the judge to take an oath that we're telling the truth? Is that your question?
Right, but he wants us to do it with the Bible as the witness to some degree, and to call on God for that truth.
Well, the theory is, it's a theory, but the theory is that you put your hand on the Bible and you're taking an oath that if I am not telling the truth, let God strike me dead. In other words, we are acting like we're in the most solemn circumstances where God is hearing us. Of course, He does hear us, and He knows that we're not telling the truth if we don't take the oath, or if we do take the oath, if we're not telling the truth. And sin brings death, even though that death may not be that instant, because the wages of sin is death. But in that swearing circumstance, it is to demonstrate that we are ready to be punished if we are not telling the truth.
So we can actually do that without sinning against God too, right? Or would it be some type of, calling upon God's name for this particular situation
we are not
that these attorneys want me to be under?
The Bible is cautioned us that we are not to take an oath on any light thing along. There are people, that say, well, by God, you can believe what I'm telling you. They are taking an oath, and they are for just any kind of a thing that they are saying. The Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no, no. Do not use God in that way at all, except in a very solemn circumstance where you're asked, let's say, in the courtroom, because even Jesus was asked to take an oath, and Paul was asked to take an oath, And that's just in a very solemn place, like in the courtroom. But for an ordinary business, we never say, by God, or I swear to God, or anything like that I am telling the truth. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, hello, Mr. Camping.
Go ahead with your call, please.
Yes. Can you tell me where in the Bible states that women should be silenced in the Congress?
Yes, there are two verses that are particularly outstanding. One is in 2 Timothy, chapter 2, where God said in 2 Timothy, I haven't looked at this for a while, and so I've lost the reference.
Okay, as long as another chapter. How about the other verse?
The other reference is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Chapter 13. There we read where God says in I haven't looked at these verses for so long that
That also, I think I know the chapter in which book. I'll look it up. Now, another thing. Can you explain a little bit, since women should be silenced in the Congress? Like,
yes,
we know that Christ is coming, 2011. It's impossible to keep shut. Like, I got to tell my friends and my family and my loved ones. Now, can we at least give out the tracts to our friends, loved ones? Or no, until they ask us? How does that work?
Well, first of all, we are not to be in a congregation because Satan is ruling there.
Right.
But if we are able to share tracts with the members of that congregation, we should try to do that. But we should not be a member of that congregation, because then we are under the authority of Satan, and we certainly don't want to worship him.
In other words, women should be silenced in the congregation, but we no longer go to church.
Well, that was even during the church age, before Satan came there. She was not to speak in the congregation. She was to be silent. She was...
Right. But now, these days that we have short time for Christ come, we want to let the world know that Judgment Day is coming. Can we give out the tracts? Because that's not, would that apply to this verse, women being silenced in the Congress, or no? Because we are not no more in Congress, in church?
I'm still don't quite get your question. If no woman or man should be a member of a congregation. Now, if you're still a member, then you are worshiping Satan. That's what the people are doing in the churches. If you are not a member and you are able to share tracts with people of the congregation, and you're not attending there, you're not pretending you are a member or something, then that would be valid, I would think. But if
there was a couple of callers before me, and she asked about homosexuality being seen, and she wanted, I guess, to show that this was seen, but you say don't go out there and tell it to the world unless they ask you.
Yes, you can pass out tracts in the marketplace, and you can stand outside of a church as people are leaving the congregation and give them tracts, or as they're going in, but you don't want to have any part with that congregation. Incidentally,
in other words, women have to be silenced only in congregation, but outside is okay for us to preach?
Wait, we're talking about two different things altogether. The passage I was looking for is 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34. And this only applied during the church age, which ended in 1988. Today, we shouldn't have anything to do with the congregation, with membership. But it says in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34, let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be obedient, as also saith the law. They are not to be teaching there. They are not to be preaching. That is the role of the men of the congregation. But now that we're out, we're not to be a part of a congregation. We can stand outside the building and pass out or meet people in the wherever they are. But we don't want to be in the congregation there passing out tracts. But thank you. We're going to pause for this message. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11, we read, let the women learn with silence, with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. Now, during the church age, God also added the fact of 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that when the congregation came together, the women were to be silent. In other words, they're not to have a Bible class in which they're teaching men. They are not to speak from the pulpit teaching men. But on the other hand, we have also in the Bible that a woman is a witness of the gospel just as a man. There's no distinction between a man and a woman. We are children of God, and our role is to share the gospel. And so when someone comes to a woman and asks a question, she certainly can give that person an answer. But the moment that she decides, I really feel qualified as a teacher, and I'm going to have a class, even in our day when we are no longer to be a part of a congregation, but I'm going to invite all my friends over and be a teacher to men and women, then that is being contrary to the Word of God altogether. We should not do that. We have to be very careful about these things and walk very humbly. But I'll tell you, to stand on a street corner and pass out tracts left and right, or to and occasionally answer a question when someone says, tell me a little more, we certainly can do that. But we are not going to set up a class and become a teacher like a man would do. But thank you for calling, and shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, you said not long that we can make a oath only if it's like in the courtroom. But the Bible specifically say that let our yea be yea and our nay be nay. The Bible does not tell us that we can make any oath in a courtroom or any place. I know I have been to court already, and when they had asked me to make an oath on the Bible, I refused to do it. And then that's your privilege to do. But you know, when we study the Bible, we find that when Christ was standing before Pilate, he was told, I adjure you, which is you're taking an oath in what you're saying. When Paul was before in a courtroom, he was asked to take an oath, and there's no indication in either case that there was a hesitation at that point. And so we know that in such solemn occasions that we are not incorrect in taking an oath if we're asked to. But the problem is that mankind in ordinary conversation, because by nature man is a liar, tries to prove that he's telling the truth by taking an oath. And so again and again he'll say, by God this or by God that, or before for heaven's sake, or whatever. All of these things are oaths in which they are taking the name of God in vain and should never, never be carried out. But if you did not take an oath, well, if the law allowed you to just say, I solemnly promise, well, then so be it. But you're misleading your listeners.
You're misleading? Well,
you're misleading your listeners.
All I'm telling you is what the Bible says, that Jesus was told to take an oath, and Paul was asked to take an oath.
But Christ told us not to make any other oath, that must let our yes be yes and our nays be nays or no. That's what he said to the disciples.
Yes, that is true. But you see, when we look for truth, we have to look for.
You cannot have it both ways.
We have to look for everything the Bible has to say about that. And of course, Jesus is without sin. He would never have sinned. There's no evidence at all that Paul was sinning when he was standing before the judge and was asked to take an oath. And if you feel like you don't want to do that, well, okay, then don't do it. That's your privilege, and I'm not going to say you're wrong or right, but as I understand the Bible, if I'm in a courtroom and asked to take an oath, I would take that oath. But if I'm talking to someone just about whatever I want to tell them, I never will take an oath to try to emphasize that I'm speaking the truth. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, Brother Campy.
Yeah.
I hear people talk about it took Noah so long to build the ark. He had 3 sons. Is that true? So if was his sons born after he started or before he started?
Why? Was it true? He began to build the ark from the evidence of the Bible when he was 480 years of age, because God said his man will become 120 or won't become more than 120, and he's not talking about the lifespan of men, because men after the flood lived much longer than 120 years. So we have to understand this is when he was told to build the ark. And then after about 20 years after he started building, his 3 sons were born. We don't know exactly what years, but the first one was born 500 years before, when he was 500 years old. And then the flood came when he was 600 years old. So we have that much information about Noah.
His sons did help him build the ark, so it wasn't that hard for him to get that done. His sons were born during that time, so they helped him.
The sons were born after he had begun the construction of the ark, according to the evidence of the Bible.
Okay. Now, another thing I want to ask a question about. It says in the Bible some were born for salvation, others were born for destruction. About when he talked about the vase and things like that. So this was already, I guess, preordained that he lets. God has never, like you said, has never done anything that he didn't let us know. So people keep saying things like that, but he's always told us.
Well,
and in that passage,
we know this, that he had 3 sons, and each of them became married before the flood came. And Noah, of course, was married because long before that, and all of them were saved. We know that absolutely because they were all on the ark. They were all being completely obedient to Christ. And those 8 people, those Noah and his 3 sons and their respective wives, were the only ones who were not destroyed in the flood of Noah's day.
Okay, again, just one more time. It says in the Bible that when he says some were made for destruction and some were made for a salvation. So as I said before, that he's always let mankind know what he wants to, what he's going to do. And people get saying, well, why did little children have to die and everything, but the idea is that he let us know that, yes, some of you are made for salvation and some of you were made for destruction.
When May 21, 2011 arrives, all of those whom God planned to save and did save, they will be raptured. If they had previously died, their bodies will be resurrected, a glorified spiritual body. All of those he had not planned to save, they are those included that are made for destruction, because the wages of sin is death. And that's the way that it will be demonstrated on the first day of the day of judgment. But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Good evening, Brother Harold.
Yes.
Hey, how you doing, brother?
Go ahead with your call, please.
Hey, I wanted to just remind you that David Hoff, Brother David Hoff, was the one that did an extensive study. There was a caller there, about the second or third caller, when you started the Open Forum. He asked you about Daniel chapter 11, verse 5 and 6.
Yeah, he did a lot of work on that, and I was not able to follow all of it, and so I don't really feel qualified. One of these days I'm going to get into that for some detail.
Yeah, I hope you do. I'm sure you have notes of it from your past studies. But I wanted to go to 2 Timothy chapter 3.
2 Timothy chapter 3?
Yes. Verse 6 and 7.
For of this sort are they which creep. It's talking about, let's start with verse 1 to get the context here.
Yes,
this know also that in the last days, that is in our time, perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. Now, what is your question?
Well, it was actually not a question, but I'm hearing someone who keeps calling you about 2 or 3 times a month, and very rarely I recognize this voice. But I just wanted to just bring this up to par, because this woman keeps calling and she's like intimidating you and telling you what to do. It's like she's God's policewoman or something. And I'm sure maybe you don't remember, but I recognize her voice, and she calls 2 or 3 times a night, which is wrong.
Well, if she does, then it means that she is very impolite. She is not being fair to other callers, and I wish she would try to follow the rules, because then she can demonstrate her own faithfulness.
Well, that's why I wanted to share this piece of the chapter 3 here in 2 Timothy about these silly women. I don't want to be harsh about it, but I'm just bringing it up to truth for the way it is, because she calls about 2 or 3 times in the night to tell you what to do and dictating, to God the way she wants to hear.
Well, I'm sorry, but...
No, you don't have to be sorry. She's the one that needs to, look at that,
We try to control this as best we can, but, there's always a way to break the rules and try to get away with something, and this is the kind of world that we live in. But thank you for calling and sharing, and shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hi, Brother Camping. How are you tonight?
Very well, thank you.
Could we look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 25?
1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25, we read, For ye were as sheep going astray, but are now returned unto the shepherd and bishop of your souls.
And could we compare that with 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7.
1 Timothy chapter 3, verse. There we read, "This is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, diligent, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, nor striker, nor greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil." Now, what is your question?
Would this refer to the Lord Jesus in the 1 Timothy passage? Because the bishops these days wouldn't fall into that category?
Well, no. This actually is a rule. God established the church age. It was established to carry the gospel to the world, and as in the form of congregations, and the congregations were to have spiritual rulers over them. They were to have those who were elders and deacons and pastors, and they had to be qualified. And in 1 Timothy chapter 3, God qualifies an elder or a pastor, and when we examine these qualifications, we find that virtually every church has elders or pastors or deacons that are in violation of these rules. God has given these rules to the churches, and they have been violated over and over and over again. And
okay.
That's one of the reasons that the churches have been so far from the truth of the Bible.
I have one more passage, Brother Camping. Genesis chapter 8, verses 7 to 12.
Genesis chapter 8, verse 7 to 12. There we read, "And he sent forth a raven." Noah is in the ark, and it has been the floods, the waters have been on the earth for almost a year. "And he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed or waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed or waited yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more." Now,
what does the raven and the dove represent?
Well, the raven represents, that is an unclean bird. And here the world had become very wicked. And so, except for these 8 people in the ark who were true believers, God destroyed every human being that was on the face of the earth. Now, does that mean now he's beginning again, and now we're going to have a world that has no more sin? All the sinners have been destroyed, and this family is a believing family, and surely now there won't be sin in the world. But the raven represents sin, the dove represents the true believer, and it shows that indeed, no,
that was not an end of sin in the world. The line of sin was still in the line of Noah, even though he himself and his sons were saved. Nevertheless, their progeny would also turn out, many of them would begin to be just as sinful as before the ark.
And like in verse 12 where it says, and they return not again unto him anymore?
The raven went out, and sin is out. It's out there. You can't bring it. You can't bring sin back in. You can't stop it. Mm-hmm. It's there doing its work of causing the world to become more and more sinful. But by the same token, the dove is out there, and it is indicating also that finally there would be salvation going throughout all the world, and we don't know who it is that will become saved.
Thank you, Brother Camping.
Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yeah, hello. My name's Anderson. I'm just barely reading the Bible, and I'm trying to understand it. The word Bible, does that mean basic instructions before leaving Earth? Does that stand for something, or
no? The word Bible is
somebody made up.
The word Bible is the word book, just the word book, but the fact that the Bible was from the mouth of God, as we read in a number of places, we therefore are recognizing that it's not just any old book. It is a very, very important, special book written by God Himself, and therefore it has absolute authority. It is absolutely trustworthy and true.
Okay, I was watching the news like a couple of days ago, and it showed some guy from Florida saying that he is Jesus Christ, and there's a lot of people following him. Is there like a lot of false prophets or a lot of people saying that they're Jesus, but they're really not?
Well, all kinds of people from time to time claim that they are God. I get every now and then, I'll get a letter or an email or something from somebody who will say, listen to me now because I am the Christ, or I am a special prophet sent by the Christ, and He has given me a message for you. That is the nature of man. In their pride, they really want to be as important as Christ is.
Okay.
But thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Hi, Brother Camping. Thank you for taking my call. My question is Luke 14:26.
Luke 14, verse 26. Luke 14, verse 26. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now, what is your question?
I'm interpreting that as that
you
have to hate yourself and your mother and your father before you can follow Christ. I know that's wrong. I must be wrong. Can you explain that to me?
You remember the biblical rule. We interpret every verse in the light of the whole Bible. If we would just take this verse and set it apart from the Bible, we'd have to conclude that we are to hate everybody, even ourselves. We're to hate, and we can only love Christ, and that's the only place our love can show. But we know that's not true, because other passages say, love your enemies, and so on. And so then we have to try to harmonize all of this. And what the fact is that there are two kingdoms in this world. There is the kingdom of Satan, which every unsaved person belongs to. And there is the kingdom of Christ, that only the true believers belong to, and it's very small compared with the size of the kingdom of Satan. And in somebody's home, for example, one individual, it can be a son or a daughter or a mother or a father, may have become saved, and therefore they are a citizen of the kingdom of Christ. And on the other hand, the rest of the family members are citizens of the kingdom of Satan. And in that sense, therefore, one in the kingdom of Christ hates them because he doesn't like the kingdom of Satan. But on the other hand, he loves them with a passion because they are his enemy and he desires the highest good for them. But there is going to be, and those in the kingdom of Satan may very frequently hate the one who is a true believer with a passion, and then they don't come to any love for them. Now, when it says even to hate himself, well, we are not to be proud of anything that we are. We're not to think how great I am. We are to remember that anything worthwhile, anything, is only what Christ has done in our life.
Okay,
but thank you. Thank you for calling and sharing. And shall we take our next call, please? Welcome to Open Forum.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah.
When God put a limit to the life of man, and I believe in Genesis it says 120 years, that was due to sin. But Jesus, when he came to earth, and as he grew from a baby to an older man, how are we to interpret that? Because he was being part of I don't want to say a curse, but he was growing older.
Well,
every man gets older and eventually dies.
Let's go back to Genesis chapter 6 and read that. Genesis chapter 6. There we read in verse 3. And Jehovah said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And then it goes on and it goes on to describe the fact that there was a man named Noah, and he was commanded to build an ark because there was going to come a flood. And so that's the only place in the Bible where God limits the age of man to 120 years. Thousands of years later, on Mount Sinai, Noah was given a command that the lifespan of man shall be 70 years, or if by reason of strength, 80 years. It was there or later on in one of the Psalms, I guess. 70 or 80 years. And that has been about the situation. But so that 120 had nothing to do with the physical age. But I've come to the end of our time, unfortunately. I can't expand this. Until our next Open Forum, may the Lord richly bless you.